Good evening all, and welcome. Come get comfortable by the fire, for we have many a scary tale to share with you tonight. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. Number 1. In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old, broke and jobless in Mexico City. My entire life had steadily gone down the drain for the past couple of years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when an online friend I had met in person 2 years before invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get some pretty sweet holidays in the country that I always wanted to visit. I have no problem doing labor work, and in fact, I was looking forward to it and to get my body into real action. Since I moved back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I had been feeling rusted and soft. So I packed my suitcase, put on my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting absolutely smashed. I arrived at Stavanger in Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead. So after an hour of filling in reports and giving the address of my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him. My friend Harold. He was standing there, confused and annoyed. He told me later he was about to leave the airport, thinking I had decided to not take the flight after all. I guess I was lucky. That night I spent with Harold and his friends in the oceanfront apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger, getting drunk on Norwegian beer and smoking weed. The next day, Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse about an hour south of Stavanger, in a community called Ergesund. At least, that's the name of the place I was in. Norwegian names and addresses are weird if you're not familiar with them. The land that Harold owned was huge and beautiful. Not really sure how it all works, but in his property, there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was small, located on top of a hill with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in the 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced to the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the window was covered by boxes and papers. But I decided not to mention it, since Harold didn't seem to care. I assumed the guy was an eccentric, or maybe was just a normal precaution, considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with neighbouring houses separating us by big fields. I just took my mind out of it, and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After being installed in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that week Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus the house was going to be filled with the bride's family from Bergen. In general, it was great to meet them, but on my second night, when everyone had gone off to sleep and Harold or I were still chatting and drinking beer, I got to meet the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been having some trouble with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech savvy, and had indeed been the one purchasing the phone from Harold. We went downstairs to Olaf's basement. Now, Harold kept telling me he didn't like Olaf, and was actually upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement. But for what I understood, they had some kind of relationship more than just landlord and tenant. The basement was all dark, all the windows covered, and piles of junk cluttered at the entrance place. The bedroom was full of computer parts and electronic junk he had blinking and beeping. Olaf invited us to sit down, and when he turned on a desk lamp to check Harold's phone, I got the first real good look at him. He was in his mid-40s, but looked older, had a shaved head and was really skinny, big nose and deep shadows under his eyes. He had the entire look of a meth addict. I should know, since I worked in a recovery house in Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. I had seen the same face back then in people who were dealing with severe addictions. The way he stuttered only confirmed further my observation, and I decided I had to keep my eye on him. My gut told me right then and there he was trouble. Olaf finished with Harold's phone, and then directed his attention to me. He asked me if I wanted to see some porn, to which I declined entirely. I just wanted to leave that dark, oppressive basement. Harold laughed a drunken laughter, and asked Olaf if he had gay porn, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexuality of the videos. He simply liked seeing people getting things introduced into them. When he said that, I got chills running down my spine, and I asked myself if he meant it in a sexual way, or if there was a more ominous meaning to it. But we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day tomorrow, and I was tired and thoroughly creeped out. When we were back in the house, I asked Harold if he trusted Olaf, to which Harold answered that Olaf wasn't his friend at all. He's just an addict renting the basement. The government paid for Harold to rent, and a nurse visited him twice a week to bring him his medication. And after dropping that bomb, he said goodnight and went into his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but between my gut feeling and him popping into the house unannounced when everyone else was preparing for the wedding, I couldn't really relax. The first time he went inside was to give me a flash drive with movies he had illegally downloaded from the internet. He made sure to emphasize the illegal part. The second time, he seemed high and wanted simply to let me know that if I needed something, I could ask him for anything, but asked me not to tell Harold about him going upstairs. He said that, and then walked out very slowly and carefully, as if he knew he would fall if he were rushed. Once the wedding was over, and the house was empty again, except for Harold and me, the encounters with Olaf became even more stranger. One time, whilst I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast, I turned around to find Olaf standing on the kitchen door, bleeding from his nose and staring at me. I jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, making a huge mess, but he didn't seem to notice. He simply started babbling incoherently, whilst directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling on top of my head. I was petrified, trying to think of a train of actions that wouldn't trigger a violent response. He simply turned around and quietly walked out the house. I started locking the doors whenever I was alone in that house. That night, I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway. Harold went out to get drunk and didn't come back until the morning the next day. I had tried to stay up and wait to talk to him, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed, and when I caught a glance of him walking towards the barn with the dog and a 6-pack of beers through the living room window, I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but discovered that the internet was down. That's weird, I thought. In the whole time I'd been there, the internet had never failed. I went to the router and restarted it a couple of times to no avail. I decided to let it be, maybe Harold had cut the internet as a way of drunkenly punishing Olaf. So I just got on with my morning routine and had breakfast before going to knock on the barn door. That would give him some time to blow off some steam, I thought. I went downstairs to the bathroom, got comfortably naked, and jumped in the shower getting ready to refresh myself, and sung a few songs to lift my spirits in preparation for the grim talk that awaited me with Harold. Halfway through the first song, I heard a loud bang coming from the front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I thought Harold must be pissed drunk and angry. I sighed while turning off the shower, thinking I was going to have a long argument when the bathroom door slammed open. I saw to my horror Harold coming at me with a deranged expression on his face, wielding a big cutter knife. The kind that employees use in warehouses to open boxes. For a few seconds, I couldn't think or focus on anything other than the knife in his hand and the fact that I was naked, wet and cornered in a small bathroom in the middle of nowhere in Norway. I was paralyzed. My biggest fear was actually happening, and I couldn't scream nor move. I just stared at the knife he kept pulling and pushing, making that now horrifying noise that blades do when operated. I was about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling, accusing me of playing Harold's feelings. He was calling me a liar, a filthy Mexican, and throwing in some threats about cutting me open and messing me up if I tried to take anything from Harold. That, I think, is what got my gears moving once again. He's calling me a thief. I can be called whatever, but I'm not a thief, and I'm not a liar. So standing there, getting myself angry at the psycho in front of me, threatening my life, my training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. I remembered the rules when dealing with altered addicts. Make eye contact. Keep your hands down so you don't startle them. Speak in a calm but dominant voice always. Always refer to them by their name. And that's exactly what I did. Despite the fear and the certainty of me being stabbed to death, I stared at him into his cloudy, crazy, wide-open eyes and said, "Olaf, you're the thief. You're the one who keeps stealing Harold's silverware. You're the one who keeps breaking into his house. Harold is not your friend. Harold doesn't even want you living here." It was a long shot, but it worked. My words made him confused, and I was able to take one single small step forward, making him take one step back. Then he charged at me again with his rant, and wielding his knife to my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping on my back and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched his knife forward. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him, every time gaining another step, pushing him little by little out the bathroom. He might have noticed what I was doing, but by then it was too late. When he took the last step out the bathroom door frame, I moved as fast as my terrorized body allowed me to, and slammed the door on his stupid crooked nose. I locked it immediately, and pushed against it with all my body, while a storm of curses, punches, and kicks rained on that little farmhouse door. I remember praying to God to keep the door in place, and to keep the psycho outside. There was nothing I can use in that bathroom to defend myself. Nothing against an infuriated high psychopath wielding a knife with a possibly broken nose. After what seemed to have been an eternity, I heard and felt the last super strong kick to the door, and then, to my relief, he stormed out of the house with a loud bang. However, I stayed put for a further 20 minutes, not being able to breathe or think anything else, other than keeping the door closed. I wanted to puke, but I couldn't move. Eventually, my senses came back, and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door of the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew he could hear me move on the first floor, and he had his stupid camera spying the driveway. I jumped the garden, jumped the fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged and screamed for Harold to let me in. The drunk shit was living his drama, and I needed help. So I ran to the next house where his sister lived, rang the bell, and when she opened, I explained to her as best I could what had happened. She didn't speak a word of English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes, until her expression shifted from confused to absolute terror mirroring my own. She walked up to the barn, opened the door, commanded Harold to guard me, and went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shocked and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what had just happened. His drunken state had gone by the time I'd finished explaining. He too went to the basement, and I could just hear the screams. They took him out. Their sister and her husband got Olaf in the car and took him away. Harold stayed with me all day. I drank so much beer, I simply couldn't get drunk. I wanted to get drunk, I wanted to forget, but I couldn't. I was told that Olaf admitted to having the knife, and that his intentions were to make me fight him. So, in reality, he wanted an excuse to stab the Jesus out of my naked butt. After all, he did like seeing people get things poked into them, right? That night, I slept in the house while Harold kept guard of the house. I had some tools with me to defend myself, and of course I slept fully dressed. It was a horrible night, and the next morning we went to the police to file a report. But even the cops seemed baffled, and couldn't believe something like that would ever happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the cop who took my statement asked me if there was somewhere I could go for a while as they sorted out the mess with Olaf. In fact, I told them I was planning to visit Germany the very next day. The last day I barely spoke with Harold. I didn't blame him, but he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf that I was leaving, and he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he understood he had to defend Harold. So he, Olaf, cut the internet, waited for me to get into the shower, and went upstairs to do his job. I left Norway without a single word, without looking back. They told me I could verify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information and promised me justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I never heard back from police. When I asked Harold about what happened, he told me the police dropped the case for lack of evidence, and Olaf is back in Harold's basement, doing whatever he does. Life goes on. I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away when there's nothing to burn. I tried to focus on the good things in life, and life itself. Every day is now a gift, or a chance, but the shadow of fear never really left me. I keep looking over my shoulder, keep studying people, just in case I have to defend myself. I still have a deep sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at the gym. I can't help but think that I would have ended up a bloated corpse in a pool of blood in that shower, unnoticed for hours, maybe days, until someone needed to use it. If I had done something different, if Olaf hadn't been so high to be intimidated by my words, that would have certainly been me. I still don't know how to get rid of that thought, but I'll try. All I know is that Olaf is free, and I really, really don't want to meet him again. Number 2. This story took place 3 years ago. For a little background, I was with my then boyfriend from the UK, as he had come to visit me and meet my family in beautiful Colombia. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so I decided to buy a couple of plane tickets and take him from one plane to another at the very next day of his arrival. I did a lot of research, since I wanted to show him a place that not even I knew, and that we would both be able to explore together. I chose this set of islands, near the west coast of the country, at least 10 hours away from my home. The plan was to get off the plane, take a cab to a small coastal town, and from there take a boat to this island. We made it to the small regional airport on time, took our bags, and started asking where we could take a cab that would take us to the next stop. We found a cab service that took us along with other people in a van, and after a few hours, we made it to the small fishing village. After getting off, we noticed the sun was setting and that no boat would take us to the island at the time. So we found a cheap hotel where we could sleep in for the night. And after walking around and asking in different hotels, we chose the cheapest one. It was a little gross, but we didn't care. We were all about the island that waited ahead. On the next day, after a delicious yet humble breakfast, we took our bags to the port. We found a boat, and it took us to the little island we wanted to go to. Our time in the island was lovely. We were almost alone, and stayed at an eco-friendly hostel that took our breath away. The white sand beaches were clean, since no more than 50 tourists were allowed on the island at the time, and most of them were locked inside a 5-star hotel that we found by walking down the shore. After 5 days of this beautiful paradise, we were heading back. Money was running low, and since I was the one paying for almost everything on this trip, I was struggling to keep up. We made it back to the fishing village somehow, and we still had 1 day left. We searched again for a nicer hotel this time, somewhere we could actually shower and relax. Then, we got bored indoors. It was too hot to stay inside, so we decided to go out and explore. This town was small in comparison to other Colombian cities or towns, but at the same time, quite overpopulated for what it was. More than 2,000 people lived there, and even though they all knew each other, it still felt a little crowded. The beaches in this town were not as nice as the islands, especially because the sand was dark, the ocean had brown and green coloured waters, and it was dirty, since the amount of tourists from other small towns nearby was at an all-time rise. We did not want to bathe in those waters, and started asking around where we could go for a nicer beach nearby. Many people agreed that there was a beach called La Playa del Francés, translating to the French people's beach, and apparently it was cleaner, solitary and romantic. We need not hear more. We took a simple bag with our phones, sunblock, water, towels and our wallets, as well as the hotel key. I was wearing this bag across my body, since it was an ethnic kind of bag that we use in Colombia called mochila, and it's basically one big bowl of fabric with a strap sewn or cut on opposite sides. It has no way to close up, so imagine you're wearing a grocery bag but the straps are just one and it's way longer. We started walking and the sun was scorching and the sand felt like burning, even through our flip-flops. I must admit, it was exciting exploring, but at the same time, many people warned us to be careful, that there were a lot of alleged robberies in the area. But this is an everyday thing in my country, so I paid it no mind. Every time I saw a guy, or a group of guys, my heart would flutter. It was like having tiny panic attacks, every time you see a face coming out of the dirt roads. This was a very poor town, so I wasn't concerned about how the people looked raggedy or dirty. However, my heart fluttered here, and that's when I saw people, especially once the tourist area started fading out, and we just kept walking towards the port and the more empty beaches. We noticed the sand getting cleaner, and less trash around, less people, and less everything. We saw this group of guys talking, and they stopped as they saw us and started to stare. I tried to remain calm and tried to look like I wasn't scared out of my mind, and asked with my strongest voice, "Excuse me, do you know how far Playa del Francés is from here?" One of them scoffed and replied, "You are way far. Maybe you should take a cab or a motorcycle." We did not want to spend that kind of money on unnecessary expenses. I had already started using my card since I was out of cash, so I just looked at him and said, "Okay, thanks. We'll keep walking and see what happens." We uncomfortably waved and kept walking. We noticed that as soon as we left, so did they, and were talking between themselves, but it wasn't possible to hear what they were saying, as they were walking in the opposite direction. We saw the port that we were approaching, and the beach in the area was closed. We were forced to take one of those dirt roads parallel to the beach and into the neighborhoods. What we didn't know is that we were walking right into the slums. My boyfriend back then was very cheap. I'm not saying everyone from the UK is, but this particular guy was a real Scrooge, a real penny counter. So we started fighting. Once I figured out how far we were, but he didn't want to chip in for a cab ride. I got really upset and said, "You know what? Screw it. I've covered for everything on this trip, and I'm fed up. We're heading back." He started arguing something like, "I've already spent money as well," to which I interrupted with another snappy comment, and so on and so forth. The fight got a little heated from then on, partly because of the intense heat, and partly because my feet hurt, since it was so hot, and I started walking in front of him, getting further and further away. As we fought, we headed back towards the beach we'd came from, and just before we reached it, I saw this young, scrawny guy standing next to a bush, right in the corner where we had to turn. I paid no mind since I was upset, and focused on fighting with my cheap-ass boyfriend. When we started getting closer, I noticed the guy was staring at us, and I just thought it was because we looked exotic. A very white blue-eyed foreigner with a dark-skinned Colombian with long hair. I made it to the first corner, and I was about to mutter a weak good afternoon, since it's a common courtesy in our land to do so, but the words dried in my mouth, as the guy quickly stood forward and jumped at me. The movements were so fast, I only saw glimpses of what was happening. There was another guy, hidden behind the first one, but this one went straight to my very scared and frozen feared boyfriend. The first guy tried to grab my bag, as he pulled his huge knife from behind his back. It was a long and wide silver blade, and it shone against the burning sunlight. He kept saying something like, "You stupid gringos, give me the bag." By this time, I fell on the ground. The blow didn't do anything to me though. I was too concerned about keeping my hands around my bag, holding it tight against my chest. That bag held inside my brand new iPhone, the same one I had just started paying for. Thoughts raced through my head. What was my boyfriend doing? The guy kept trying to pull the bag from underneath me, and I cried, "No, please no." And he said, "Let go or I'll cut your face." I was rolling on the ground hugging the bag, and saw the shine of the knife again, but this time it went under me, as he tried to cut the strap from the bag I held so well. He yanked the bag, and I stood up as soon as I could to see him getting on the motorcycle, as the other guy is just blocking my ex. This made me hate him at this point. This stupid idiot was just held behind the other guy without even touching him. He was blocking him by just standing there, and my idiot ex just stood there as if he were being held captive by some invisible box. The second guy turned to see his friend getting on a bike and rushed to do the same on another bike, parked behind the bush they had been hiding. I did not hesitate. Somehow I wanted to fight for that phone. It's hard to obtain such expensive items in Colombia, and I've worked really hard for the past couple of years to get a brand new one. I was powered by pure hatred. I hated them. I hated the country. I hated the government. I hated the fact that society's conditions have created such violence, such poverty, such deprivation. I felt sick of all of it. I wanted to bash their heads in. I wanted to be violent. They quickly took off on their bikes, and I took off running behind them. My flip-flops flew in the air as my first few steps hit the scorching hot dirt road and the tiny rocks cut underneath my skin. I was fueled by hatred, and I ran like I'd never run before, and at the same time I was screaming. There were people just standing there on their precarious house doors. Some of them even came outside as they heard the commotion. I was screaming, "Stop them, they robbed us, help!" I never thought I would say such a silly word. Believe me, people prefer to be robbed and head home feeling defeated afterwards. Hell, I've done it many times, but this time, I was determined. I was tired of being a pushover for a lousy crook that was half my age. I would give it my all just as I grabbed my bag, like I was grabbing for the edge of the cliff. I ran like I was being chased by Jason Voorhees. I ran and screamed for tow blocks, and many people started screaming as well and pointing at them. But no one did anything, and soon enough, they started gaining territory in front of me. They then turned around one of the corners down the road. I kept running, and I saw them turn yet again on another corner. By then they were too far and I couldn't follow anymore. I was heartbroken, and I stopped running. I threw myself on the ground and started pounding the dirt road, crying and screaming hysterically. I couldn't believe they robbed me so easily, in such a stupid way. How could I explain this to my parents? How could I even contact them? People started walking towards me and surrounding me. My idiot ex-boyfriend arrived a few seconds later, jogging slowly trying to comfort me, but I wasn't having it. I cried as people asked me what they took. What did you have in the bag? Between tears, I cried, our phones, our wallets. But at this point, I realized phone robbery isn't so common that it wouldn't matter at all. So I decided to lie. Our passports, and he's from England. How is he going to get back? They all started murmuring, whilst a huge, luxurious truck appeared at the end of the road. A very heavy woman yelled right away, "They took their passports. There's the mayor. There's the mayor." Some other lady asked, "Anyone knew who it was?" And then I heard another voice saying, "It was Mrs. Rosario's son, I saw him." The sounds were now getting confused. There were at least 20 people around me trying to comfort me and asking questions. The truck slowly rolled closer, and the heavy lady pretty much jumped in front of it. She was screaming too. "They took their passports. That's why we don't get tourists here from other places." And more people started complaining to the mayor. I slowly stood up and looked at the man behind the wheel. He was a very heavy fellow, shaved head, no facial hair, and had a stern look on his face. He said nothing. There was a guy next to him. He seemed to be his secretary and he did all the talking. He asked where we were staying at and asked what they took. I told him I didn't know who they were, but the heavy lady interrupted me and repeated, "It's Rosario's son, the one from the slums." The mayor remained quiet and just staring. The secretary then said to a couple of guys standing in the back, "Take them back to their hotel," and then looked at me. "We'll let you know if we find anything." After that day, the other two guys took us back to our hotel, on the back of their dirt bikes. I felt defeated and weak. We got back to the hotel, and we explained at the front desk what happened, and the reason why we didn't have our key anymore. The owner, an elderly gentleman, walked us back, muttering encouraging words, and opened the room for us. I threw myself on the bed and cried. My feet were bleeding, and my head felt like exploding. My idiot ex tried to console me, but I just scoffed and told him to let me be. I had to make phone calls now, cancel my cards, my national ID document, all of that annoying complicated stuff. A few hours passed. I calmed down took a shower, and started thinking what I was going to do next. Then I heard a dirt bike, and after that a call to our room. The front desk gentleman told me that there was someone looking for the gringo couple. So we went outside. It was the heavy lady, riding a beaten up dirt bike, and boy was she upset. She kept saying that she hated when things like this happened, that the mayor needed to step up and make the town feel safe for tourists. Because that was their whole life income right there, selling snacks, knickknacks or beers to tourists on the beach. She then saw the mayor's truck coming down the road and told me, when he comes closer, we'll demand that he does something or I'll do it myself. The truck came closer and pulled up again. When the window rolled down, I saw the stern look on the dark face again. He said nothing, but the secretary did. We found a bag, but there were no passports in it, and then he pulled up my mangled bag and cut strap, but it didn't excite me. I muttered something like, "Oh yeah, we checked, and the passports were actually in the room, thank God." He gave me a weird look and said, "That's all we could recover. Sorry about that, but people really should have warned you before you entered the slums." I meekly took the bag and felt the weight way lighter. I was not optimistic at this point. I muttered a quick thanks, as the heavy lady kept talking about how this could never happen again, and that this is their town and they need the tourists to come and visit. I held the bag on my stomach, as if its warmth would make me stop feeling the emptiness inside, but it didn't. I then started walking towards the room again. I opened the bag, just to make sure what they had left in it. And surprise! At the bottom, I saw my phone, with no case, just the plain phone, my cards, and documents. They'd taken the wallet and the room key. I felt like screaming. I took it out, and my phone was on airplane mode, which made me assume they tried to unlock it and couldn't since they didn't have the passcode. I couldn't believe my luck. Until this day, I still don't believe I got it back. It's a bit like finding a green sapphire, it's so unlikely. The gentleman on the front office came towards me and said they were probably looking at your every move ever since you made it back from the island. They knew where you were and what you were going to do. Be careful in the future. To which I only replied with an automated, "Yes sir, will do." I can't believe my screaming, crying, lying and hysteria had worked to my advantage. My then boyfriend and I left next morning, counting our blessings and heading back to my hometown. We didn't last for long after that though. He just wasn't strong enough for me. I was already feeling invincible. I was a badass, and I wasn't ever going to be scared again. I used to work at this clothing and accessories store in a very busy oceanside town that in the summer was usually crowded with tourists. I had been working there for nearly a year at this point and really enjoyed my time there. I got to meet a lot of cool, unique people, talk about the town's history, and made some good sales. The shop was owned and created by my boss, Jack. Besides me, there was only one other employee who worked for the company. I worked 5 to 6 days a week, and she worked the other 2. When you worked, you were always by yourself, even late at night, except when Jack would pop in sometimes during the day to see how things were going or pick you up an order, as we made our own shirts. He lived right up the street, about 1 minute walking distance, and you can see his house from the front doors. One day, I went in for work around 10 AM, and I had been there around 45 minutes with no customers yet, but lots of people passing through. This man waltzes into the store and comes up to me and starts speaking with me. Immediately I feel something's off. He's kind of short, dark greasy hair, huge glasses and broken teeth, and his eyes hold no emotions. "Do you know who I am?" he starts saying hysterically. No. He hopped onto the register counter and sat there, and started touching all the little trinkets we had. "Sir, please don't sit on the counter." He hops down, and is still talking and laughing. and I really don't understand what he's saying. All of a sudden he reaches out and shoves his hand inside my shirt and inside my bra, over my breast, and rubbed it. I gasped and shoved him off me. "Don't you put your dirty hands on me!" He started laughing hysterically and ran down the corridor. My heart was beating so fast. I was on the verge of tears, and I called my boss and asked him if he was home. He told me he was, and that he's busy. I tell him he needs to get to the store immediately, and the man is back standing in front of me. "I'm going to come back to get you tonight, and we're going to do it. You're going to do what I want." He says it in a low voice, staring right into my eyes. Then he laughs and runs off again. I feel sick to my stomach. There were 5 people in the store during the whole interaction, and not one of them said a word to me and avoided looking in my direction. My boss walks into the door, and I tell him what happened. I see his face drop and his eyes go dark as I describe the man, and he takes off down the hall. He comes back 30 seconds later, dragging the man by his shirt collar, and shoves him out onto the sidewalk. The man tries to leave, and my boss holds him down. I could see him shaking with anger as he yells at the guy to stop moving. The police arrive and take the man and stand with him by the police car. A policewoman comes to speak with me and has me fill out a statement. I'm asked to speak with the male police officer, and as I come over to talk to him, the man starts laughing again and saying crude things about me. The man tells him to shut up, and the guy says, "I like your gun," and tries to grab it. The cop slams him in the car, cuffs him, and shoves him in. He asks if I'm okay and if I needed anything. We talk a little more about the incident. He takes my statement and says that we'll be in touch. I go back to the store, and my boss asks if I want to go home or stay. I say I want to go home, and he has his wife come down and take over the store for the rest of the day. She gives me a big hug and comforts me. I have my boyfriend come and get me because I'm too shaken up. I got home and cried. I had issue with panic attacks for a year after this. I kept having nightmares that he came back at night and tried to kill me. My boss eventually fired me because I'd been so depressed and anxious about being there that I wasn't very good at my job anymore. He actually told me when I came back to work a few days later that he was going to use my story as a cautionary tale for future female employees, which kind of offended me as he hired only young women. And they shouldn't be working alone at night in the first place, especially since our store is near many bars and I've had lots of run-in with drunks. I kept getting phone calls from people wanting to go to court/press charges, but I was too afraid to call back. I wish I had done something now. So creepy molester guy, let's not meet again. You ruined a good year of my life with your assaults and threats. Let me just preface this story as to why I was traveling alone. So one of my best friends, Kyla, and I work seasonally at a hiking lodge in British Columbia for the summer. We're both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto for the winter. We decided though that this year, as I bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully. So wonderfully, in fact. We ended up staying longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now my friend Kayla started schooling on November 1st, so I dropped her home in Montcalm, New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I couldn't come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia, something which had been on my bucket list for years. So knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hotel for the next day. November 1st, at the Acolyte Hostel on the Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed because I waited until the last minute. A private dorm with a queen-size bed for $35 a night. I thought, what a bargain, and booked immediately. I left Kyla's house at Montcalm at 7 AM, knowing it was a long drive. Now the Cabot Trail is roughly 150 kilometers long, so I thought to be safe, I'd plug the hostel address into my Google Maps and head straight there and get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel for roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with the front desk and figure out the nearest hiking trails and bring my bags in later. I was about to arrive to my hostel, according to Google, but all around me was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me the destination was on my left. I saw nothing. But all around me, around 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar, bent to look like the letter A, spray painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte Hostel, so I guessed that must be the place, and followed the dirt road. It led me to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn. No signage, and there were 2 cars parked in front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man, around mid-40s, with dark hair and an intense smile, hopped out of the barn and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes, and he asked why I booked so last minute, and I explained the situation. Seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on a grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep and 3 feet around. He led me across some particle board laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about the property is that there were no windows. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin, the owner. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for the space. It all seemed pretty far-fetched, as it was just a big old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up the skeleton stairs made of plywood and 2x4s to the cabin loft where I would be sleeping that night, along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted I call her Mum. The upstairs was certainly open concept. A frail curtain separated the beds to the side, with a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was the only occupant for the night, and he said yes. I had a feeling he didn't get occupants often. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area, and wanted to go to them before it got dark. He gave me very detailed instructions of his favourite hikes, and how to get to them, and off I went. I figured the place wasn't ideal, and I wished the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked last minute. Beggars can't be choosers. Plus, he was very friendly and helpful when giving me hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd head into town for dinner. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season, it was a ghost town. All the hotels and B&Bs in the area were boarded up. Such a ghost town, in fact, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark, dingy, empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase lightly, a disappointing supper. I had this romantic image in my head of me sitting on the harbour front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some ocean-fresh oysters. I was assured by the bartender/cook the fried oysters I had ordered were definitely not fresh, and I didn't ask. I figured with all my options for things to do, and C, exhausted, I should head back to the hostel and ready my book. I got back for around 8 PM, and I could smell the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. The little boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys often do, "My name is JP, what's yours?" I say, "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He immediately asked if I wanted to play. I said definitely, just let me put my bags down in my room. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room. So instead of getting settled in, I headed straight out into the main area, and I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, and grandmother were all sitting down getting ready to eat, without even acknowledging we were there playing in front of them. The mother and father just start what seems to be a basic argument, which then turns into them yelling at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP I needed to go to my room and call my mummy, as she was wondering where I was. Of course, the boy who doesn't understand proper boundaries yet follows me through my curtains and sits on my bed. I try taking his attention away from his family fighting, so I start asking him where he goes to school, what's his favourite colour, and his mother starts calling for him, but he doesn't answer. Instead, he chooses to sit in my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yell to the mother that he's in my room. She runs in and snatches him off my lap and yells to the father, "I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP. Don't follow us." I hear her book it downstairs and him run after her. I hear a car start up in the lot, and not just drive, but peel out the driveway. I hear him cursing, a door slams, and the sound of the excavator that I had seen outside earlier that day came on. I guess he wanted to do some work to let off some steam. Now, just left upstairs is me and Grandma, who still insisted I call her Mum. I walked out of my not-so-private curtained room with my bag and say, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts, but I should go." She starts rubbing my arm and telling me to stay, explaining her daughter-in-law doesn't understand Kevin like she does, and that she's the real problem. Now I'm ready to tell Mum to piss off and that I'm leaving, until I realise she has a knife in her hand from cooking dinner. It's only a 4-inch paring knife, but, with intent, I'm sure it could do some damage. I don't think she meant it as a threat. I think she was just a kooky old bird who didn't understand maybe how to hold a knife and trying to console a teenager. So I go along with what she's saying, while she rubs my arm with one hand and flails the knife around in the other. I inch closer and closer downstairs and towards the door, and she keeps rubbing my arm and shoulder with her free hand, telling me to stay, and that her grandson is special, and before I even booked the night, he had a premonition that I would be coming to stay with them. As soon as I get out the door, I run towards my car. I start the engine and back up the lot to get out of there. Kevin is in the excavator and blocking the path, with about a 5-foot ditch on one side of the drive and forest behind me. He gets out and says he's sorry and tells me I should stay. He'll make it up to me, and Grandma comes out with knife still in hand saying it's Kevin's fault I'm leaving. They bicker for a full 5 minutes until I yell at them that if they don't let me leave I'm calling the police. All of a sudden they get super defensive, like I'm the one being unreasonable. So I turn off my engine and start to dial. Kevin gets back in his excavator and starts backing up. As soon as he's far enough away, I can see an opening to drive across the grass. I turn my engine back on and rip out the driveway. I'm sure doing a number on the suspension of my little sedan. As soon as the property is out of sight, I call my friend Kayla. No service. I remembered back to earlier in the afternoon, when I first got to the hostel, I was going to check my messages and saw the no service sign. Even if I'd have wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to call the cops. I drove the 6 hours straight to Montcalm, New Brunswick, and stayed with Kayla. This all happened in July of 2004. I was 12 at the time, and my parents brought me to Kona, Hawaii, the Big Island. Needless to say, the time was amazing, and it's just about the last place you'd expect something creepy to happen. That is until the second to last night there. My parents and I were tossing a ball in the ocean when I overthrow my dad, and a kid my age catches it. We invite him to join in, and after a while, my parents get tired and go back onto the beach, whilst me and Jason, the kid, stay in playing. A woman that appears to be his mother is walking around taking pictures of us, and when my mum tries to start a conversation with her, the woman completely ignores her. Turns out Jason lives in LA and is heading back tomorrow, just as we were, and we were connecting through LAX, and thank God we didn't share a flight. Once it's dark, we go back to the beach, and we don't see Jason's mother anywhere. He confirmed it was her, and after searching all over the beach, we head back to the hotel. To clarify, the hotel is directly behind the beach with a pool and a bar in between. You can vaguely see the beach through the palm trees, depending on the floor, but certainly not your child. We take Jason up to his room and see if his mother is there, and he says hello to a man on his way up, as if he knows him. My mum asks if the man is his dad, and he says no, as his father ran off 5 months after he was born. We knock on the hotel door several times, and we hear the TV on, but no one answers. We're all hungry, and we go down to the lobby to use the phone. He calls up to the room and leaves a message that we were going to eat downstairs in the restaurant. So we had buffalo wings and a soda. We spoke about SpongeBob, Ed, Edd and Eddy, and he seemed like any other kid. It was a bit strange though. We were all in the ocean and lost one of our floats. He went swimming after it way too far, and my dad called him to come back. Otherwise, who knows how far he'd have chased it and possibly drowned. Now, it had been at least 3 hours since we saw any sign of his mother, until we head back up to the lobby. She's there by the concierge screaming at us, and she's called the police. Knowing how crazy this is, my dad called them as well. They arrived rather quickly, and we tell our story. All the while, Jason's mother is shouting, "You're just trash," at us repeatedly. I don't recall Jason saying much of anything, and eventually, the situation dies down, and we go back to our rooms, placing a desk in front of the door. Fortunately, we didn't run into them on the way back. So I hope, Jason, that you're doing okay. But Jason's mom? Let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's video of spooky tales, and if you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and why not consider subscribing to not miss your daily dose of horror. If you've got a story that you would like to send and have me read in a future video, feel free to submit it to my Reddit page or to my email, both of which can of course be found in the description. And if you want to feel fresh and stylish for the new year, consider picking up some of my awesome merchandise. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can always try and help the channel grow by visiting my Patreon. Your support, as always, is tremendously appreciated. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.